First at 9 this Saturday, the 5th of April 2025. The mighty Modi visit. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi officially welcomed to Sri Lanka with pomp and circumstance this morning. Done deal. 7 memoranda of understanding exchanged between the two neighbouring nations. Prime Minister Modi and President Dissanayake inaugurate key India-backed development projects across the island. Fist of resistance. Protests rage on against MOUs inked between India and Sri Lanka. Sarvajana Bale leader asserts lack of transparency over inked MOUs. Political leaders voice concerns over deals signed with India. Titanic tariffs. US tariffs send local and foreign markets into tailspin. Former President Wickremesinghe calls for completion of EDCA to mitigate tariff impact.
EDCA should be complete. My idea was that it should be completed in 2025.
Opposition leader calls on the government to remove barriers hindering free trade.
Chilo Dairy, Sri Lankawama, Kiren Perata. Obe Vishwasi Dinu Sensodyne, then Langamati Pharmacy in Labagata Hacker.
කණ්ඩ පරිස්සම් කරගත්තොත් අපි පරිස්සම්.
ඉතින් මොකටද නිකන් නාගන්නේ? ස්වදේශී කොහොඹ ලෙමන් ග්‍රාස් අද කාලෙට ෆ්‍රෙෂ්ම විසඳුම.
This is Derana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to Derana First at 9. I'm Aditya Singha joining you live with the latest in Sri Lanka and around the world. Brought to you by the only Sri Lankan media network to rise to the pinnacle across all media platforms, recognized as the best by every survey and beloved by the people. Now in your top story tonight, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi was officially welcomed to Sri Lanka through a special ceremony at the Independence Square this morning. Indian Prime Minister Modi is scheduled to visit Anuradhapura to pay homage to the sacred Jayasrima Bodhi tomorrow, the final day of his state visit. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi touched down at the Bandaranaike International Airport at around 8:30 p.m. last night, beginning his 3-day official state visit in Sri Lanka. He arrived in an Air India One special aircraft reserved for top-level Indian dignitaries. Reaffirming the theme Friendship for Centuries, Commitment to a Prosperous Future, Prime Minister Modi's visit, upon an invitation extended by President Anrukumara Dissanayake, aims to strengthen the long-standing bilateral ties between Sri Lanka and India. The Indian Prime Minister and his delegation were warmly welcomed by Sri Lankan officials, including Minister of Foreign Affairs Vijitha Herath and Minister of Health and Mass Media Dr. Nalinda Jayatissa. Subsequently, the Indian Premier signed the Golden Book for VIP visitors and dignitaries at the Bandaranaike International Airport in Katunayake, marking his visit. The Indian Prime Minister then arrived at the Taj Samudra Hotel in Colombo, where he was heartily greeted by the Indian community in Sri Lanka. The Indian Prime Minister, through a post on X written in Sinhala, Tamil and English, appreciated the warm welcome extended by the people, saying the rains were no deterrent for a spectacular welcome by the Indian community in Colombo. At the Taj Samudra Hotel, the Indian Prime Minister watched a puppet show inspired by the centuries-old Ambalangoda tradition. At the event, Vadini Punpeshala Manoj released a new Tal inspired by Hindustani music named Tal Nandashri. This is the first time a Tal as such was created and published in Sri Lanka. The new Tal was ceremonially presented to Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the Taj Samudra Hotel. The official welcoming ceremony for the Indian Prime Minister was held this morning at Independence Square, Colombo, under the patronage of President Anrukumara Dissanayake. Special traffic and security plans were implemented in Colombo over the ceremony.
Of India, Narendra Modi at the Independence Square premises, where he will be officially welcomed.
The official ceremony kicked off with the singing of national anthems of India and Sri Lanka. The traditional gun salute was then performed with the firing of 19 rounds of artillery in honour of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Subsequently, the Indian Premier was accorded the ceremonial Guard of Honour. The Indian delegation was then introduced to key Sri Lankan officials present at the ceremony.
We're now witnessing the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, being introduced to the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, including the official parliamentarians of Sri Lanka, who's being introduced right now.
President Anukumara Dissanayaka, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the two delegations subsequently departed to the Presidential Secretariat to engage in bilateral discussions. Indian Prime Minister Modi also met opposition leader Sajith Premadasa this evening in Colombo. At the meeting, the opposition leader drew attention to the recent imposition of tariffs by the US and called on the Indian Premier to grant Sri Lankan apparel manufacturers access to the Indian market. Subsequently, Prime Minister Modi also convened with parliamentarians of the Tamil National Alliance. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is scheduled to visit Anuradhapura tomorrow, his final day in Sri Lanka. During his Anuradhapura visit, the Premier is expected to pay homage to the sacred Jai Sri Ma Bodhi tree. He will also formally inaugurate the Maho-Anuradhapura railway signalling system and the newly upgraded Maho-Omante railway line. Both projects were completed with assistance of the Indian government.
Union Assurance. චන්දුරුසුනේ කාගෙන් මනාපේ සිංහ TV සඳහා සුපිරි ඩීල්.
Seven memoranda of understanding were exchanged between the Indian and Sri Lankan governments on various sectors, including energy, health and digitalization, while 3 India-supported development projects were virtually inaugurated by Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Anukumara Dissanayaka today. During a joint press briefing, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi was presented with the Mitra Vibhushan Award, the highest award bestowed on a foreign head of state by Sri Lanka.
After the official welcoming ceremony of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the Indian Premier met President Anuradha Dissanayaka at the Presidential Secretariat to commence official discussions. Following the official meeting between the two national leaders, bilateral discussions took place while the two delegations also commenced their discussions. 7 memoranda of understanding were exchanged between Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Anuradha Dissanayaka on sectors including defence, energy, digitalisation and health. The first MOU exchanged between India and Sri Lanka was on the high-voltage direct current interconnection, facilitating the import and export of power between the two neighbouring states. An MOU on the digital transformation cooperation between India and Sri Lanka was exchanged thereafter. A trilateral memorandum of understanding involving Sri Lanka, India and the United Arab Emirates, aimed at further developing Trincomalee as an energy hub, was exchanged with the participation of the Ambassador of the United Arab Emirates to Sri Lanka, Khalid Nasser Al Ameri. Afterwards, a memorandum of understanding on defence cooperation was exchanged between Sri Lanka's Secretary of Defence and the Foreign Secretary of India. An MOU focusing on multi-sectoral grant assistance for the Eastern Province was exchanged between the Secretary to the Ministry of Finance, Economic Stabilisation and National Policies, Mahinda Sirivardhana, and High Commissioner of India to Sri Lanka, Santosh Jha. An MOU on cooperation in the field of health and medicine was exchanged between the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare of India and the Ministry of Health and Mass Media of Sri Lanka, while an MOU on pharmacopoeia cooperation between the Indian Pharmacopoeia Commission, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare and the National Medicines Regulatory Authority of Sri Lanka. During the event, President Anuradha Dissanayaka and Indian Premier Narendra Modi virtually inaugurated 3 development projects. The 3 projects included the commencement of the construction of the Sampur solar power plant, which will add 50 megawatts to the national grid under its first phase. The Sampur solar power plant will be developed by Trincomalee Power Company, a joint venture between India's NTPC Limited and the Ceylon Electricity Board. The Dambul Agricultural Cold Storage Facility and the installation of solar panels on 5,000 religious sites spanning all 25 districts were also inaugurated by the two heads of state. With a 5,000 metric ton capacity, the Dambul Agricultural Cold Storage Complex has the ability to reduce post-harvest losses by 40%. This facility was the first of its kind to be built in Sri Lanka with a total cost of 524 million rupees. 300 million rupees were granted by the Government of India, while 224 million rupees in construction funds were put up by the Sri Lankan government. In the meantime, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi also expressed his opinions on providing support for the development of the Anuradhapura religious city complex, Tirukoneswaram Kovil in Trincomalee, and Seethamman Kovil. The Indian Premier also commented on the exposition of sacred relics in Sri Lanka on the 2025 International Vesak Day. Subsequently, a joint press briefing by the Indian Premier and the Sri Lankan President was also held.
සාර්ථක ණය පුතුගත කරන වැඩසටහන සහ ස්ථාවරත්වය කරා ගමන් කරන අපගේ වත්මන් ආර්ථික තත්ත්වය පිළිබඳව
I explained the successful debt restructuring program of Sri Lanka and the current journey of our economy towards stability to Prime Minister Narendra Modi. I would like to express my gratitude towards the Indian government for its support during the debt restructuring process. We discussed the successful defence cooperation between the two countries and how it will develop further. I reaffirmed that Sri Lanka's territory will never be used for any reason that will threaten the security of India and the stability of this region. Our discussions also focused on bringing sustainable solutions to the issues faced by fishermen and the need for a collaborative solution in this regard. We also requested measures to halt bottom-dragging fishing gear prohibited in both countries, which causes harm to the marine environment, and to restrict illegal, unregulated fishing. We also appreciate Prime Minister Modi's timely and realistic concept, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, together with all development for all. I am pleased to announce that the government of Sri Lanka has decided to confer upon him the highest Sri Lankan honour for a foreign head of state, the Sri Lanka Mitra Vibhushana, a souvenir for the great companionship and the unbroken multifaceted support provided by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. This honorary award is conferred upon heads of state and governments for their friendship. We firmly believe that Prime Minister Modi, who always stood by Sri Lanka, highly deserves this honour.
සැමවිටම ශ්‍රී ලංකාව වෙනුවෙන් පෙනී සිටි සමීපත මිතුරෙකු වන අග්‍රාමාත්‍ය මෝදි මැතිතුමා මෙම ගෞරවය ලැබීමට අතිශය සුදුස්සෙකු බව අප තරයේ විශ්වාස කරනවා.
Afterwards, Indian Premier Narendra Modi was bestowed with the Mitra Vibhushana Award by President Anurukumara Dissanayaka.
I am extremely proud to receive the Mitra Vibhushana Award from President Anri Dissanayaka. This is a matter of great pride for me. This is not just an honour for me. This is an honour to the 1.4 billion people in India. I say this as a tribute to the historic and deep friendship between the people of India and Sri Lanka. For this recognition, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to the government of Sri Lanka, President Dissanayaka and the people of this nation. As Prime Minister, this is my 4th visit to Sri Lanka. My previous visit was in 2019. Even then, I had faith that Sri Lanka would rise and rise stronger. I truly admire the courage and resilience of Sri Lankans. Today, seeing Sri Lanka once again on the path of progress fills me with happiness. It is a matter of pride for India that we have fulfilled our duty as a true and responsible neighbour and friend. In every difficult situation, including the terrorist attacks in 2019, the COVID-19 pandemic or the recent economic crisis, India always stood with Sri Lanka. President Dissanayaka chose India for his very first foreign visit and I had the honour of being his first foreign guest. This reflects the depth of our bilateral ties. Under our neighbourhood first policy and Sagar vision, Sri Lanka holds a special place. Off the back of these developments, Indian Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri noted that India concluded the debt restructuring process with Sri Lanka following the exchange of bilateral agreements as part of efforts to assist Sri Lanka in its journey towards economic recovery in line with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Sri Lanka. Meanwhile, Defence Secretary retired Air Vice Marshal Sampath Tuyakonta asserted that the Indo-Lanka Defence MOU will not impact or interfere with the sovereignty, territorial integrity and internal affairs of both nations.
A special media briefing was organised by the Indian Ministry of External Affairs today, in line with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Sri Lanka.
The two leaders held a restricted meeting followed by delegation level talks. They were able to review developments in the relationship and the progress made on the joint vision of fostering partnerships for a shared future that had been adopted during President Dissanayke's visit to India last year. There are a few new ones that have been added from this visit as well, and demonstrating our continued commitment to assist Sri Lanka in its economic recovery. India has concluded the debt restructuring process with Sri Lanka with the exchange of the bilateral amendatory agreements on debt restructuring. We have, as you would be aware, been pursuing an investment-led strategy with Sri Lanka together with a grant assistance oriented approach to ensure that Sri Lanka is firmly on the path to sustainable and long-term economic recovery. There is a recognition also at the leadership level that the security interests of India and Sri Lanka are interlinked. MOU on defense cooperation. The President of Sri Lanka has mentioned and stated very, very clearly that Sri Lankan territory will not be used or be allowed to be used in any manner that is inimical or detrimental to India's interests. During discussions today, he said that neither Sri Lanka's land nor the oceans around it will be allowed to be used in any manner inimical to India's security.
In the meantime, issuing a statement over the Indo-Sri Lanka MOU on defence, Defence Secretary retired Air Vice Marshal Sampath Tuyakonda noted that the relevant agreement is expected to play a crucial role in bolstering Sri Lanka's defence efforts. The statement went on to say that collaborative efforts under the agreement will take place in accordance with international standards, adding that such efforts would not impact international policies or legal systems of both nations. It was also emphasized that sovereignty, equality, territorial integrity and internal affairs of India and Sri Lanka will not be violated or interfered with during the implementation of collaborative efforts under the Defence MOU. The statement further highlighted that the MOU, which will be in place for a span of 5 years, can be terminated on 3 months' notice.
Fast track your career from O levels with eSoft.
ඩයිබටසෝල් සීනිවලින් පරිස්සම්වන ඔබට අමතක නොවන පෝෂණය.
කැලනි වයර් කිසිගින්නක් නෑ.
කිසිගින්නක් නෑ. කැලනි ෆයර් ෂීල්ඩ් වයර්.
Welcome back. Now, as one end of Colombo was decked out with pomp and circumstance welcoming the Indian Premier, another end of Colombo saw protests initiated by the Frontline Socialist Party, citing lack of transparency over the deals signed with India today. The protests continued undeterred despite a court order preventing demonstrations being issued against 6 individuals.
The Frontline Socialist Party organised a demonstration today under the theme "No Agreements That Sacrifice the Country to Indian Colonisation." As the protest kicked off, the Fort Police informed the Fort Magistrates Court of the demonstrations, prompting the court to issue an order preventing demonstrations against 6 individuals, including the Frontline Socialist Party's propaganda secretary Duminda Nagamua. However, despite the court order, the Frontline Socialist Party protested for around 2 hours in front of the Colombo Fort train station this afternoon. The police strengthened the security in the vicinity, preventing the demonstrators from marching forward.
There's an agreement to be signed that allows the Indian government to lay pipelines between India and Sri Lanka to transfer oil. What are its dangers? They will swipe Sri Lanka's oil tanks for themselves. They also intend to take over Sri Lanka's crude oil shipping business, which relies on Sri Lanka's strategic location in the Indian Ocean. The time has arrived to stand up against colonization. We must also proceed against this puppet regime now. Meanwhile, leader of the Sarvajana Bale, parliamentarian Dilith Jayavira, asserts that no one is aware of the content of the deals inked between Sri Lanka and India today. He made these remarks at a meeting in Kalutara. The Kalutara district edition of the island-wide series of awareness programs organised for Sarvajana Bale's local government election candidates was held today under the patronage of party leader, parliamentarian Dilith Jayavira.
මෝඩි අගමැතිතුමා ඇවිල්ලා ඉන්නවා බලන්න කවදාකවත් ඉන්දියාවේ ජන අගමැතිවරයෙක් එනකොට
Prime Minister Modi is now in Sri Lanka. For the first time in history, an Indian premier brought down with him helicopters, vehicles and guards. Any reasonable man would be scared of this situation if they watched on YouTube the NPP's previous comments. In the past, they used to organize lectures against Indian expansionism. I feel bad for the innocent people of Sri Lanka. Over 60,000 people, including a close friend of mine, died because of them. A 14-year-old boy selling Bombay onions was shot dead. His crime, selling onions imported from India. Several doctors were killed for prescribing Indian medicine. The government hasn't even told us what deals they intend to sign with India. We know exactly what those deals will be. The president must keep in mind that 60,000 great Sri Lankans of his generation and mine sacrificed their lives after being suffocated by manipulative and deceptive political rhetoric. Does he not have a responsibility to rectify that mistake nationally first?
වගකීමක් නැද්දාද මේ පිළිබඳ ජාතික නිවැරදි කිරීමක් ඉස්සෙල්ලම කරන්නට.
With that, here's a look at some political thoughts shared today on the same theme. If you intend to accuse previous governments over your inability to provide relief to the people, I urge the government to think twice before you sign these deals with India. Several generations of Sri Lankans down the line will suffer because of these deals. The parliament nor the people of this country are aware of the details of the agreements signed between Modi and the president. In the past, when J.R. Jayawardena signed an agreement with Rajiv Gandhi, the same party led a rebellion in the country and claimed the lives of thousands of people. It is regrettable that such a party is not transparent with the people of this nation. After suffering unbearable torment while we toil to prevent our nation from being controlled by India, through the deal signed today, Anura paved the way for India to subjugate Sri Lanka. None of us know the content of these agreements. We are only able to access information about it through Indian media platforms. This is incredibly unfair. If this occurred while the previous governments were in power, how would the JVP react? We will not sign any agreement without making the people of this country aware of it. The government has very transparently told the public about the content of these agreements. Unlike previous governments, we don't have any hidden agenda. That was their habit, and that is why they are making all sorts of comments now. We should all hoist black flags today and protest all around the country. We pasted posters against this betrayal around the country, but the police removed all of it early this morning. Not a soul was there to remove posters when the JVP pasted them. Now the freedom of expression has eroded away. We were kicked out because of this disloyalty. None of our previous leaders handed over our national security to India. Us betraying our country to Prime Minister Modi? We represent a triumphant generation of fighters who fought for the independence and liberation of this country. Our enemies must keep that in mind. These are individuals making noise unnecessarily. When a leader of India visits Sri Lanka under our governance, it is a proud moment for us. Welcoming him, making economical and political agreements are steps that must be implemented. This country must be developed with collective support. When action is taken for Sri Lanka's betterment, pointless arguments are being made. Welcome back. Now, as the new tariffs rolled out by the Trump administration wreak economic havoc worldwide, Sri Lanka stock market took a sharp tumble downhill, with the ASPI and the S&P Sri Lanka 20 losing 2.8% and 4.3% respectively. Against this backdrop, former President Ranil Wickremesinghe highlights that completing the EDCA agreement and operationalizing the already finalized free trade agreements are crucial for Sri Lanka to weather this tariff storm.
US President Donald Trump's announcement of reciprocal tariffs sent markets worldwide tail-spinning into chaos. Sri Lanka too saw its markets plummet, with the ASPI and the S&P SL20 losing 2.8% and 4.3% respectively. Analysts predict a continued free fall of stock markets across the world, including those in the United States, Japan, the UK and Germany. In the UK, the FTSE 100 plunged almost 5%, its steepest fall in 5 years, while Asian markets also dropped and exchanges in Germany and France faced similar declines. Market experts put the odds of a global recession in the fallout of President Trump's tariff announcement at 60%, up from 40% previously. Some experts dubbed the new tariff structure the worst US economic policy in 100 years. Commenting on the recent imposition of tariffs by the Trump administration, former Sri Lankan President Ranil Wickremesinghe claims that completing the ETCA agreement and broadening ties with regional economies are crucial tactics Sri Lanka can embrace to mitigate ensuing adverse economic impacts of US's reciprocal tariffs.
ECTA should be complete. My idea was that it be completed in 2025. We have to go ahead. Now you see we were relying on US and others, but you can see how the US trade policies are now. US as a market will not be that open. We don't know what will happen with EU because we are depending solely on these for our apparel market. So first is that we have to complete this agreement and sign it this year. Then thereafter, we've already signed an agreement with Singapore and with Thailand. We have to operationalize them and then enter into other agreements, especially with the RCEP. We have to have a new trading policy. While we don't abandon what we have, we go into the new areas. But that also requires new product. Apparel alone may not be enough because many of them are apparel manufacturing companies.
The reciprocal tariffs were also discussed at the high-level meeting between President Anno Dissanayake and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Colombo today.
On tariffs, it is obviously something that has impacted everybody. I think Sri Lanka is also dealing with this issue. There was discussions on this during the meeting between the President and the Prime Minister. The President of Sri Lanka emphasized in particular how important it would be in the current context for the relationship between India and Sri Lanka to be strengthened even further, especially in the economic space, in order to deal with the fallout of some of these developments. And of course, the Prime Minister assured him that India would always continue to stand by Sri Lanka as it encountered and dealt with these difficulties.
Opposition leader Sajith Premadasa too discussed the impact of these tariffs on Sri Lanka with the Joint Apparel Association Forum at the opposition leader's office in Colombo.
Sri Lanka needs to partner with other regional economies facing the same issue and adopt a collaborative program. We also need to set up free trade agreements that grant Sri Lanka a competitive advantage. The government needs to eradicate barriers hindering foreign direct investments. We urge the government and organizations affiliated to it to leave aside their egos and implement these measures promptly.
Against this backdrop, the committee appointed by the President to submit recommendations on the new US tariff system convened with President Anno Dissanayake today. According to the President's media division, the committee's proposals on the country's strategic response to the tariffs and future steps to be taken were thoroughly reviewed at the meeting. Off the back of these developments, the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development revealed that the government stands ready to engage with the US administration at the earliest opportunity to explore ways to manage the bilateral trade balance in a fair manner. Issuing a statement, the Ministry of Finance asserts that the government is committed to substantially reducing tariff and non-tariff barriers that hinder trade and investment. The ministry further claims that improving the ease of doing business remains a top priority of the government, since it strives to create an environment that encourages innovation, fosters commercial partnerships and unlocks opportunities for both nations.
That's all the news we have for you tonight. Thank you. Have a great night.